Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be battling the end of the universe in Umbrella Academy Season 3, and then experiencing mortal life for the first time in the many deaths of Laila Starr. But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, mainly I've had COVID, which may still be showing in my voice, and it's all been very fun. I have consumed quite a lot of media in the last 2 weeks, as the lucky subscribers of my newsletter would have read, but the one I'm going to talk about today is the Apple TV sitcom Mythic Quest, which I have now watched most of. I think there are 2 seasons up and I've seen about 1.25 of them. So yeah, this is a sitcom about a games company, that make and run a massively multiplayer online role-playing game called Mythic Quest. The cast are led by Rob McElhenney, who is I think also known for being in Always Sunny, a show I have not seen, and Charlotte Nickdow as the 2 lead. Well, one is the sort of creative lead and the other is the programming lead. And there's a lot of arguing between them. There's a lot of arguing between them and the producer, the monetization guy, played by Abed from Community, Danny Pudi, playing enjoyably against that character here as this really unpleasant, unscrupulous, money-obsessed executive. He's very good at that as well. Yeah, it's a workplace sitcom with an added layer of video game cynicism. So there's a lot of stuff about workplace squabbling combined with some stuff about dealing with, say, what happens when your game gets full of Nazis. And it's pretty fun. I think the comparisons with Silicon Valley are kind of inevitable, and it does have a bit less bite than Silicon Valley, maybe. It's not as harsh and cynical about the realities of the modern online world, but it's still quite cynical, and not every show has to be a tower of bleakness like Silicon Valley and The Boys. So yeah, I was ill. I wanted to watch a fun sitcom with some decent jokes and maybe a little bit of, heartwarming camaraderie, and Mythic Quest more or less has it. Like a lot of sitcoms, it's getting better as it goes along, and it grows more towards the characters and away from slightly more generic workplace business.
That sounds good. Yeah, I've heard a lot of good stuff about this show, but haven't had a chance to watch it. I guess this is a kind of workplace sitcom is a sort of classic setup. There's so much potential there for sort of comedy. The whole thing of like in a workplace, people are brought together with people they wouldn't normally interact with, and you sort of meet different personalities. And
they can't leave.
Yeah, exactly. They can't leave and they have to work together. Yeah, it's a sort of endlessly iterable, if that's even a word, format. But yeah, it's interesting they kind of take into the very modern space of the massive multiplayer online gaming world. And it sounds like they are keeping it fairly contemporary with, I guess, exploring issues to do with the far right infiltrating gaming spheres.
I mean, it's not, that's deep, philosophical and depressing an exploration of the far right within gaming spheres. There's just, they're a pain. There's a few near-to-knuckle jokes about Nazism, and then the show finds a way to deal with them in a way that mostly embarrasses them. That's basically the approach they take to it. They are fools to be embarrassed and dealt with.
I guess it shows that at least that the writers are up to speed. I guess there's nothing more telling about a show set about people who make a massive multiplayer online game, and you can just tell that the references are like 5 to 10 years out of date, and you're just like, oh, these people are not cutting edge. They're just, they don't know what they're writing about, or they're just sort of making lots of jokes about, I don't know, nerd culture from, again, 10 years ago. It kind of shatters the illusion a bit when that happens. I'm trying to think of an example.
I mean, I'm not gamer enough to tell you how up-to-date this is. I mean, it seems like the obvious thing they're satirising is probably World of Warcraft, right? But isn't World of Warcraft arguably not the hot online role-playing game of now? I mean, I'm pretty sure the hot online game of now is Fortnite. I'm down with the kids, but I think it's Fortnite.
There's League of Legends, again, which a lot of people I know play.
Yeah, true, there's that.
I mean, World of Warcraft, I think, very much set the template for this type of game. It's been around for a while. I think it's probably still quite popular. South Park did an episode assassinating World of Warcraft. Got it probably over 10 years ago, maybe even be closer to 15 or 20 years ago. But again, that is just full of jokes about like basement dwelling sweaty nerds with acne problems and stuff, and like it all seems quite dated now when you look at it, whereas like actually I guess the big debates in nerd culture are like the political issues of the moment, like who gets to speak, what creators are tolerated, kind of far right infiltrating these circles to spread the culture war. That's more current than obviously what was in the South Park episode.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's, some attempts to satirise current issues. There's the fact that they're all beholden to the opinion of, like, a 12-year-old with a YouTube account who rates their multi-million-dollar enterprise out of 5 buttholes or something. Yeah.
Again, sort of anarchic side of the internet.
Yeah.
Crude and anarchic, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a bit where the future young female coders of America or something, a bunch of young girls who are interested in coding, come round for an inspirational trip, and there's this sort of desperate period where they realise that the one senior female coder isn't in that day, and they have to introduce them to like the next woman they can find who is an executive who lives in a cupboard. Yeah, there's some sort of engagement with the issues, I guess, the current issues.
Yeah. Just looking down the cast list, I can see that it also includes legendary actor F. Murray Abraham, who I guess most people know from playing Salieri in the film version of Amadeus, but also probably most recently voicing the god in Moon Knight.
Yeah, he's in this as a sort of drunk burnout writer. It's pretty fun.
Imagine he's good at that.
Yeah, the faded sci-fi writer they've hired to write their backstory is F. Murray Abraham. In the second season, I think, because this show does actually have a sort of COVID special to acknowledge that the pandemic happened. You know, one of those ones where they're all on Zoom. And then in the second season, F. Murray Abraham is working remotely, which I guess is semi-realistic, and also they didn't want to get him sick. Fair enough.
Yeah, might also explain why he's doing like voice work for Moon Knight.
Yeah. I mean, the third season is coming in a few months, I think. I think I'll probably finish the second season and be able to start the third in shortly later. So maybe he'll be back for that. But yeah, at the moment in the second season, the post-COVID season, he's working remotely. But yeah, he's good.
I've seen quite a bit of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I haven't seen like all of it, and there's like a gazillion seasons at this point. I think it's the longest running live-action sitcom of all time.
I mean, in terms of number of seasons, I'm sure it's probably getting there, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's really been going longer is like The Simpsons. Rob McElhenney, obviously, yeah, very funny in Always Sunny, playing a very specific type of character, you know, again, specific type of sort of Irish-American lad, I guess you would say, in a sort of American take on that. But yeah, it's interesting to see him branching out, doing other things, because he is a very funny actor.
Well, yeah, in this he's playing this sort of self-important, creative douchebag with no self-awareness, basically. This massive ego who everyone else rolls their eyes at.
I can see him being very funny in that role.
Yeah, no, he's very good. As I say, I've not seen Always Sunny, but he's very good here. It has almost made me consider blasting through some Always Sunny.
There's like a million episodes, so it'll keep you busy for a while. But it is actually very funny, but I guess we're not reviewing that now. But yeah, I guess if you get COVID again and have a lot of time to watch.
Yeah, and the next time I get COVID, I'll watch like 10 seasons of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Yeah, I think it's time.
I'm kicking myself that when I was down there for COVID, it was the perfect time to finally watch The Wire. Instead, I watched all the Oscar movies for that year that I hadn't seen.
I mean, all I did was watch this sitcom and another like 5 or 6 episodes of The Americans, so, you know, I can't say I mean, The Americans is fairly credible, I guess. I'm getting through it, guys. I'm not going to bother reviewing it again until I've actually finished it, but I'm now in the middle of series 4 out of 6. It's still incredibly good.
Oh, excellent.
So there we go. That's what I did when I had COVID. Alistair, what were you doing during your sad, boring life when you can go outside?
Yes, we go outside and get scorched by the intense heat of London, or just stay inside and look at it and go, no thanks.
Yeah, you really, when you think about it, I'm the winner here.
Yeah, but no, I've been watching another Apple TV show, actually. We didn't plan this, that we're both discussing Apple TV shows, but I guess it's further evidence that Apple and Disney are stealing a march on Netflix. Yeah, I've been watching Slow Horses, which is a spy drama set in London based on a series of British spy novels, and it's starring Gary Oldman. It's a very good show. The premise of this spy drama is set in a bit of MI5 called Slough House, which is where they send the spies who fuck up, and Gary Oldman is a sort of king of the fuck-ups, this sort of disgusting alcoholic slob who sort of like farts just uncontrollably all the time and is just mean and nasty to everyone and tries to do like as little work as possible. In many ways, he's playing the exact opposite of Smiley from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, you know, a spy who's very much at the bottom of his game, not the top. Yeah, and the show follows these outcast misfits, people who screwed up in various different ways to get the punishment and being sent to Slough House. And then as the show goes on, it emerged that there's a sort of a far-right terrorist plot to kidnap this student who's a Muslim and then execute him on TV. And it turns out that the only people who can really solve the case and find the guy before he's executed are the Slow Horses. And obviously they are incompetent, but they are the only people who can get this done. And yeah, it's a really good, entertaining spy drama. If you're a fan of the spy genre, then this is good, and it's slightly different in that these aren't like elite spies, they're basically the opposite. So
it's interesting because this kind of sounds like the sort of thing that... Is it played for laughs, this sort of very incompetent thing, or...?
There's moments of humour, but it's more of it is a serious spy drama. But there are definitely moments played for humour, especially the Gary Oldman character with his like ridiculous like farting and things like that. Yeah, in fact, the very first scene of the first episode is Gary Oldman is like passed out in an alcoholic haze in front of his desk, sleeping, and then farts so loudly that he wakes himself up. I don't know, on some level sets the tone for the show. I'm told by people who've read the books that this is very accurate to how the characters depicted in the book, and that a lot of people are pleased actually they kept the sort of grotesqueness in. It didn't get sanitized by Apple. And there's certainly sort of, moments of humour throughout. But at the same time, it is, it's not a comedy and it's a serious spy drama. And certainly the plot of the far-right extremists who kidnapped this guy is deadly serious and quite tense. And there's sort of layers to this conspiracy that get peeled back. One of the main characters is a young spy who feels that he's been treated unfairly by being sent to Slough House and is determined to solve the case, prove himself and get back into the regular MI5. And a lot of the plot focuses on that character, River Cartwright. It's played by Jack Lowden, who I think is quite well known, though I'm not exactly sure what he's been in.
Yeah, no, it is a good cast. I have heard a lot of good things about this show. It is, yes, another one that's on the maybe one day list. Maybe one day.
Yeah, I'd recommend it, especially if you're a fan of spy shows set in London. It's all filmed around where I used to work, so there's a lot of, scenes in pubs that I've been to, and there's bus stops that I've been to. In fact, the building I used to work in...
on days out.
Exactly. My wonderful life, look up unusual bus stops of London. To be fair, I do actually have a favourite London bus route, which is actually, goes right past where they filmed this. But anyway, that's a sidebar. The building I used to work in is also in the back of one shot, which I quite liked. But it's a good spy drama, and Gary Oldman is obviously excellent. Yeah, and they're doing a second season, which I'm very excited for. So get in with the first season now while you can.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's basically what I'm doing with Mythic Quest. To be fair, that's what I'm doing with the whole Apple TV service. Yeah, just to catch up with things now so I can follow things as they go later.
Yeah, well, me and my partner have a rule, which is we can't maintain a subscription to a streaming service if there's only one show we're interested in watching it on that service. So I was considering getting rid of Apple TV, considering I wasn't wowed by the adaptation of Foundation. And, Ted Lasso, going to be controversial and say, take it or leave it.
How dare you, sir.
But now there's Severance and Slow Horses, and you really want to see the second series of both. It's like, oh, God damn it, Apple, you've got my money.
Yeah, no, I must admit, I'm down for Ted Lasso and Mythic Quest, and I will eventually watch Severance before the end of the year. I swear to God I will. I'll probably now try and watch Slow Horses as well. It's a hard life, isn't it?
It's a hard life in the content reviewing game. It's merciless. Never stops, never a moment's peace. And now on to Umbrella Academy.
Okay, and our first main feature today. It is the third season of Umbrella Academy. This is, of course, the Netflix adaptation of the comic by Gerard Way and Gabrielle Ba. This is about an adopted family of children with superpowers who were all adopted by an eccentric and incredibly abusive and unpleasant millionaire lord weirdo because they had superpowers, and were then forced to become a superhero team only to collapse in a mess of tragedy and trauma. We pick up with our heroes having just returned from a time travel adventure in which they've accidentally time travelled themselves out of existence and been replaced by a different group of adopted siblings called the Sparrow Academy. And, of course, as well as this, they shortly later discover that not just the world, but the whole universe is ending again. So, we've seen this. Alistair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, so this was a good piece of TV I enjoyed watching. I liked the new characters they introduced. Yeah, a way to liven up a show now in its third season, introduce a whole new slate of main characters. Slightly different oddballs with slightly different superpowers. Some of them being villainous, some of them not quite so. So that was good, and they're quite creative with the superpowers. Yeah, and also they threw out a lot of new plot threads this season. There was, quite a lot of plot, but they did all link up at the end and tie together, which I liked. Overall, I felt the last season was probably a bit more compelling. I really liked the sort of 60s setting and how they brought in aspects of the 60s from Vietnam to civil rights protests. But this season still had an interesting mystery. It was very good. And as ever with this show, the characters are sort of front and centre, which I did like. And you really get a sense of the family. It's got everything you'd like from Umbrella Academy.
I think I'm on a similar level, although possibly slightly turning towards the negative. It's frustrating because I fundamentally like this show. It's a fun, weird sci-fi superhero thing. The cast are, for the most part, extremely good and comfortable in their roles by this stage. There were some growing pains back in season 1. I seem to remember Diego and Luther and Victor, back then Vanya, not being particularly interesting in season 1, but we have moved past that. Season 2, as you say, I thought was really, really good and a massive improvement. And we've continued a lot of the good character work here. I think Diego especially has gone from being one of the dullest parts of the show to one of the highlights, thanks to his sort of 4-style rebrand he had last year as a sort of himbo with minimal self-awareness. A lot of the good things are still here. I like the vibe a lot. I like the sense of weirdness. The idea of a new academy is smart. There's some enjoyable power concepts, and I think even though, as they keep pointing out in dialogue, they face an apocalypse every year and it's starting to become a bit of a cliche, they do still do a good job of making this one feel impending and impactful. Once we get to the last few episodes and the apocalypse is really upon them, their final time together is actually quite sad. The sense of impending doom, even though you get the feeling they're probably not going to all die, is quite well played. The squabbling is still entertaining. The guest character from last year, Laila, is integrated well into the gang. My complaint really is that I felt that after successfully moving away from it a bit in season 2, we fell a bit back into what I'll harshly describe as time-killing Netflix plotting in this season. Specifically in the first half, I felt like episodes 2 to 6 of this season, I felt like they could have done in half the time if they just cut down on the inevitable Netflixisms of people taking 7 scenes to make a single decision, people going on pointless episode-long errands due to misunderstandings, which would be resolved with a quick conversation, or people taking ages to discover things the audience already knows. I felt like there was a fair bit of that for a while in this show, and although they did snap to it, I think, in the last 4 episodes or so, and do a good sort of compelling ending, there was a long period of this where I was a bit sort of, come on guys, just talk to each other about the sodding briefcase. Stop sitting in rooms thinking. Come on.
Yeah, I do agree with you that the ending is kind of where it's at its best, and the sense of impending doom is good and does get quite sad, especially after they've killed off quite a few characters, so there is a real sense of sort of menace. That is kind of the show at its strongest. And it is one of those things where, like, they in the first season they had the end of the world, in the second season they had the end of the world, and it's like, I understand that if they did a plot line other than the end of the world, it would feel like an anticlimax, but they really left themselves like nowhere to go with upping the stakes, and apart from now they're ending the whole universe, which, considering it's not really like a show that involves travelling to other worlds, it's still basically the end of the world. They don't want to get in a situation like the podcast Welcome to Night Vale got in, which is, I think, they had, like, again, the end of the world as the big menace at the end of their first, like, plot arc. And it meant, nowhere to go after that. I think in the second one, it was the end of every Night Vale in every possible alternative reality or something like that. And it just got comical but not comical in a good way, how much they were just desperately scrabbling for ways to up the stakes this time. I guess this one more accurately focuses on that. The world ending is a fairly abstract thing that is difficult for audience to get its head around. What the best way to dramatise that is to show its effect on characters. How do you behave when the world's ending? Do you come together? Do you fall apart? Do you do the things you always wanted to do? Or do you finally, I don't know, just give in to the hopelessness of it all? And that's what they kind of bring out in the final few episodes.
Yeah, no, that bit was good. I felt like there's some good what do we do facing the apocalypse stuff. The stuff when they're all just having a good time at the big party in, I think, episode 9, I can't remember which one it is now, is genuinely quite sad and affecting and well done. So yeah, no particular complaints. I thought the ending paid off the various threads well. As I say, I just wish I hadn't spent much of the first half thinking, come on.
Yeah, there's definitely, that sort of sense of inevitability, which not in a good way, such as, they meet the Sparrows in, like, the first scene, and they have a fight, and the Umbrella Academy people get cast out. And that's basically the opening of the first scene of the first episode of this new season. And that's obviously kind of, that's good. And they also have a funny dance-off bit as well, which was very funny. And then after that, you basically like, right, okay, we've done the fight bit, and then the end of the world thing starts, and it's like, we're just waiting to the point when the Sparrows and the Umbrella Academy team up to tackle the bigger menace, and they take, most of the season to get to that point. Yeah, I'd much prefer them to get to that point sooner, because I didn't honestly believe the Sparrows were villains, so they have to, work with the Umbrella Academy before too long.
I mean, if they want to fight over a misunderstanding, so be it. It's a classic for a reason. But that phase did, go on a bit. I think there was a lot of periods of people and characters and items just being shuffled between, the 2 sets they had, the Academy and that hotel that the Umbrellas were staying in. Just sort of back and forth and back and forth. It's like, you're there, you're there, you're there, you're there. We put this here, then we moved it back to the hotel, then back to the Academy. It's like, okay, come on. But we're clearly just building up to the point where they're all in the same place when we could have just gone there. I don't know. It's just very circular. I mean, it is what it is. It is a Netflix show, but, just make less episodes, guys.
Yeah, I was thinking this is 10 episodes, whereas, like, a lot of shows are sort of like 8, and it probably would have benefited for it being 8 episodes. I don't think there's, like, a huge amount of, like, waste in this, but yeah, maybe if it had been 8 episodes, that would have been fine.
I do think there was quite a lot, but anyway. Yeah, and aside from that, though, I think everything that was good is still here. As I say, Diego's still entertaining after his makeover. The characters that have always worked, like Aidan Gallagher as Five and Robert Sheehan as Klaus, are both still good.
Yeah, they're excellent, and yeah, Klaus playing character quite similar to his character in misfits.
Yeah, I've got to assume at this point that Robert Sheehan is just like that.
Yeah, but he is very, very good, and each character gets an arc in the season, and so there's quite a lot of characters that are handled well.
I felt like the Sparrows could have had a bit more characterisation. They were a bit villainous.
Yeah, I meant each of the, well, I guess 7 umbrellas if you include Ben, who's in both. Yeah, I mean, some Sparrows got more than others, especially obviously Luther had a romance plot with Sloane from the Sparrow Academy, which was very sweet and nice. Some of the Sparrows I'd prefer digging more into. In fact, some of them I'm not entirely sure what their abilities were. And it's a superhero show, I guess the ability and how that shapes your character is kind of the core meat and potatoes of a superhero show. And some of them, the Sparrows were dispatched before we really understood what their deal was, which is weird to say actually we'd prefer more in a show that we were just saying there's probably too much of. But I guess if they were going to add something more to remove some of the slow pacing, maybe a bit more about who the Sparrows are actually would have been better.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they spent more time fleshing out the Sparrows and less time having the same few characters moving briefcases around, But yeah, they did knock them off fairly quickly, so it didn't have that much time to annoy me. I didn't particularly love the Allison storyline this year either. I'll continue my moaning, but this is my last real negative point. I felt like the Dark Allison story, the story where she turns, full borderline villain, got a bit tiresome, possibly again, partly due to how long it was dragged out, but her lying to people constantly, getting caught, apologising, and then doing it again just got a bit torturous by the end.
Yeah, it did, again, felt like it was dragged out quite a bit. I thought the actress handled it very well. Emily Raver Lapman, who plays Alison, you really gets across this sense of how much pain she's been through. Like, she lost her daughter and she lost her husband. It brought home the fact that, they've been through the end of the world twice. And again, that there is an emotional toll to this and there is pain and suffering brought around by this. I mean, again, one of the things you want to avoid in these sort of superhero shows or things with like big mythic plots like the end of the world, that basically, the world can end or almost end, and then 5 minutes later it's like it didn't happen. And there's no like lingering effect or anything. And this does show how the trauma of everything they've built through is building up. At one point, they even point out the second and third season supposed to take place only over a few consecutive days. It was only a few weeks ago that they were going through the end of the world like twice. And you do get that sense of like the trauma that's built up and the family is sort of falling apart, and the fact that like families are messy and complicated. Sometimes an apology doesn't cut it and there are like deep problems. I guess because this show is always linking back to the sort of family metaphor. But like I say, you could have probably done that in fewer episodes and made it a bit punchier.
Yeah, and I can see the justification for the Allison plot turn. I just found it a bit frustrating to actually sit through. It may have worked, without all the meandering back and forth, but spread over about 8 episodes of mithering, it just becomes slightly insufferable.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other characters remain good. Elliot Page is good in this. Their stuff in the first season was a bit dull, but in the last couple of seasons, they've done a good job of starting to become, to the extent that you can in this show, the sort of vaguely relatable, normal person at the heart of all this. Obviously, Elliot Page's transition is dealt with in this show, to be honest, in a way that feels a bit sort of, we've got to handle this actor admin-y way, the way they deal with pregnancies in other shows. It's just like, well, the actor wants to do this, we want to support them, we're going to do it, but it's not part of the plot, so deal with it and then get back to the plot. But if I don't have anything to say about it, then fair enough. I assume Elliot Page is comfortable with that, so whatever.
Yeah, it was clearly something that they didn't really want to factor into the main plot, or they'd written their story, or it was just, the character transitioning was not basically something they particularly wanted to link into the main plot. I thought they did quite a good job of retrospectively linking it back into the insights of the woman that, Vanya, when they were Vanya in the second season, had met. This character who was in the closet and had been like denying themselves their whole life, and finally at the end got a chance to live their life, the way they wanted to. And that revelation led into Vanya transitioning to being Victor. And again, it shows that like the emotional impact of all the things that the characters have been through. So I thought that was handled well. And there was a few, I thought, really nice moments, like Luther asking Victor to be his best man at the sort of impromptu wedding they have before the end of the world. And, there's a bit when Diego says, "You're loved." And then literally then just like transitions straight into like back to plot link dialogue. So I like the fact that they were like, this is in the background, it's not really connected to the main story, but we're going to acknowledge it, and it is handled well.
Yeah, it's handled very nicely. I think there's a lot of, as you say, sweet moments with the siblings. The one person I saw online saying it dominated the show and ruined it is clearly projecting their own issues. If you're listening, get some help.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it was downplayed. It's not really a big bit of the show. It's in the second episode, it happens, and then it's kind of not really commented on after that. It's just they gloss over it quickly. But, the show is about family and the fact that, like, family accept you and also family are kind of sometimes your most difficult and complex relationships. But like, I guess it links back to what the show is always trying to say, that they're a sort of ragtag, mismatch, unusual family, and they do love each other deep down and be willing to accept each other, regardless of things like, gender or race or that. But what causes the trouble in the family is not who they are, it's the things they've done, the lies they've told to each other, the times they've hurt people, the times they've let their powers get out of control, the times they've been selfish. And I suppose there is a good message at the heart of this, which is ultimately it's not who you are, it's what you do that makes you a good person.
Yes, which I believe was also one of the main inspirational bits of dialogue in Ms. Marvel. Yeah, it's a good show fundamentally for that, I think. The underlying family dynamics are, at this point, very comfortable and well lived in. The actors all seem to have inhabited their characters well. They're just enjoyable characters to spend time in with, even though occasionally the plotting annoys me in this particular season. So yeah, it was a decent time. I gather that if they get renewed for a 4th season, which I don't think has been confirmed yet, unless I missed that press release, then it'll probably be the last, which, I don't think it's the worst thing for them to end at a reasonable point.
4 seasons sounds good. I mean, again, they can't keep having the end of the universe every season or else it will get tiresome. And in this season, I guess they revealed a bit more about the father and what he's doing and the things that give them superpowers, the strange sort of space dust that seems to have given them these superpowers. So yeah, maybe they're building up to the 4th season will answer all the outstanding questions and then wrap it all up.
Well, yeah, I think the fact that they've used the time travel to bring the father back to life can then pivot towards a 4th season where they have a final showdown with the father. I think, there's a decent structure there.
Yeah, and there's several big revelations about the father which they've kept a secret for a while, which I'm not going to spoil for the people who haven't seen it. They're peeling back the layers on the... Going for onion metaphors today again. They're peeling back the layers on the core mystery of the show, which is probably, again, once you've addressed those, probably time to then gracefully bow out. But 4 seasons, that are good overall, providing the last one's not a train wreck, is very respectable.
Yeah, no. If they can land the 4th season, it'll have been a decent run. I think probably this is, as you sort of said earlier, my second favourite season of this show after season 2. It's not awful, but as I've said at length, it has its flaws. But we'll see how they do at the end. Yeah,
they do a good set piece in this. Like the music also was better this season. Well, the music was good in the last season when they had like 60s stuff. But yeah, use of things like Friday I'm in Love and the sort of the Footloose dance off in the first episode is very funny. And yeah, they always do a good either musical moment or action set piece. So if they can keep those coming at a sort of regular and entertaining rate, then yeah, it's all good.
Sure, they won't get through the final season without playing I Think We're Alone Now at least once. Okay, and last up today, it's The Many Deaths of Laila Starr. This is a comic mini-series from Boom Studios, which came out last year in single issues and a few months ago in its collected trade paperback edition, which we are now reading the whole of and reviewing. This is written by hot upcoming writer Ram V. Well, he's just taken on Batman, so he may almost not be upcoming anymore. He's hot established writer Ram V and artist Felipe Andrade. This is a story about the incarnation of death, who is one day called to head office and fired because someone down on Earth has created immortality, thus making her redundant. And Death does not take this well, so she, reincarnated in the form of teenage girl Laila Starr, goes to see the man who has created immortality with the intention of interfering and stopping him. And she ends up, due to a series of incidents in which she herself dies, encountering him throughout his life. So yep, this is metaphysical fantasy. We've read all 5 issues of it. Alistair, what did you think?
Yeah, I really like this comic. It's a really beautiful metaphysical story that's about death and meaning in life and kind of the nature of existence, but it doesn't feel like a sort of weighty philosophical diatribe that's trying to hit you over the head with these kind of big concepts, although they are very much there. It is a story about a small group of characters and their, how they relate to each other across particularly the course of one character's lifetime from his birth to death. And it is just very beautifully done, especially towards the ending. I thought it was very powerful. It's quite episodic, very much like divided into 5 parts, and each one is quite clearly delimited. Yeah, and each issue has a sort of self-contained story set in a specific bit of time, so I could really see how this could quite clearly translate into, say, a TV show. Yeah, all very much works as a sort of weekly issue-by-issue comic or monthly. So yeah, overall, really, really beautiful, nice, not particularly long story that I'd recommend to anyone, really.
Yeah, no, this was great. It was a nice combination of a sort of timeless fable with this sort of smooth modern execution and a playfulness, I think, that stops it being pretentious. Like, obviously it's easy to get lofty with this stuff, but there's a very sort of chatty dialogue voice. The character of Laila Starr is quite fun to be around, even though she's also, kind of bitter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a sort of a sense of fun, I think, running through it, considering this is a story about death. There's a single issue told from the perspective of a cigarette, which, again, he just doesn't feel the need to explain, but this has a sort of literary beauty to it, which makes it feel a little different to some afterlife fantasy which has to explain the mechanics at length. It doesn't really matter how it works, it's just about how it makes you feel, and things just are the way they are, and it all feels right in a sort of, as I said earlier, a sort of fable, folk story way. It's very, very finely balanced and well done. A marvellous comic.
Yeah, like the cigarette issue, it's at a party for teenagers, and again, the sort of dialogue between the teenagers about their relationships and just their life strikes me as very teenage. It's a sort of teen drama. It's not trying to be weighty and it's not trying to be pretentious, but it is just gets across who these characters are. But in a very, well, I feel it's quite honest teenage way. They've got angst, they've got love drama, they've got things that teenagers have, but also they are kind of aware of the bigger issues and, they're figuring out who they want to be and what they want to do with their life as you do when you're a teenager. So the characters come across as, in the teenage bit, not too dumb than teenagers are, because teenagers are actually quite perceptive and know something about the world, but also are very preoccupied with the things that teenagers are preoccupied, like love and things like that. And then there's a later one about the main character when he's an old man and his relationship with his son and him not having been the best father, that again, it's not melodramatic, but you get a sense of this is what family life, is like. It's never far from the particular, but it also deals with these themes that are universal.
Yeah, it somehow manages to find something universalizable, philosophy word, in almost every stage of this one man's life, and it's very seamless. It feels there's a sense of inevitability that feels right, but never predictable, because it's got this sort of pattern running through it, obviously. Like at the end of every issue, chapter, the character Laila Starr meets the same guy and then dies. And it feels right and it feels correct, and the patterns just keep repeating, and then eventually the writer will break the pattern to make a point, and that works as well.
Yeah, that's what gives it this kind of episodic structure. Each episode begins with her being resurrected by the god of life, and ends with her dying, usually in some unfortunate mishap because she's not quite figured out this whole be mortal thing by accidentally burning down the building she's in, or getting run over, or being swept out to sea. Which is, sometimes it's comic and sometimes it's tragic.
Yeah, again, there's a sort of lightness to it that prevents it from becoming just an endless, morbid tragedy. Like the way that Laila Starr keeps waking up with the same god and then having a sort of wry chat to him about, so how did it go this time? Well, it's very fun, and despite the fact that these are non-human deities, it's very human.
Exactly, yeah. One of the things I liked about it a lot is that a lot of the big dramatic moments take place off scene or off page, in the moments in between when Laila's incarnated or alive on Earth. In that, basically, she after she dies, she comes back to life, and time has passed for the other main character, Darius. And the big events of his life actually tend to happen not in the comic, in the spaces in between the issues, such as his wife dying, or him breaking up, or him becoming a successful scientist and inventor at one point. These things happen off. The big moments of his life are not what we see, and then we only get the moments when he meets Laila, and that is when it's kind of revealed and dramatized, but the biggest events of the story kind of aren't in it, which is interesting. In this regards, it reminds me of a book I read recently, a famous sci-fi novel called Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, about a woman from the 1970s, a black woman living in LA, who was taken through time to the antebellum South to save the life of the son of a slaveholder. And she's constantly, whenever she makes it back to her home time, she's then, after a bit, teleported back to the South. And all the big events in this, again, this person she's bound to, this son of a slaveholder's life, they all happen in between her visits, and that's when things happen. And it's a bold decision to put the big dramatic moments off page, but it does actually really work.
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing comparisons, it's very Sandman-esque in a lot of ways, like the sense of modern myth, the deities casually chatting, and of course, death as a young girl. But I think without feeling derivative, and, I think it has the benefit of being a 5-part story, like a closed single precision instrument, so it could just use the law very lightly and do what it needs to do to make its one point, whereas Sandman can sometimes get a bit more dense and pretentious in its lore. But Laila Starr, I think, has the benefit of, just being able to go, right, here's what we need. But yeah, if you like Sandman, you will almost definitely like this. Again, without it feeling like a rip-off, I think it's just a very good story in a similar mould.
Yeah, and the deities, I think, work really well. Again, you get a real sense of this is drawing on like Indian and I think specifically Hindu religious texts and, culture and myth, and bringing those things in. I quite like the fact that there wasn't like a lot of explanation. Like, if they did a Western one, you wouldn't explain like, this is Jehovah, he's kind of the boss of everything, and this is his son who's like half human. Like, you just don't explain that stuff. And even if they were doing like a Norse mythology, like, no one ever goes out of the way to explain the relationship between Thor, Odin and Loki, because it's assumed it's just baked in. And with this, it makes the same assumption. There's the boss god who's in charge of everything, creator of the universe or whatever. There's the god of life who lives on earth and brings people to life. But like, he doesn't go out of the way to explain the mythology and the sort of religious significance of these things, just like any other story set about a Western religion wouldn't, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, MFV's done a few comics set against the sort of Indian backdrop, and it always works. It's always good. You come into it as a person from, in our case, the UK, knowing very, very little about that society, and he always makes it work. It always gives you what you need to relate to the characters and understand why they care about the things they care about.
Yeah.
We both read The Savage Shores, I think, and again, another one, very good.
Yes, I like that as well. Again, drawing a lot on Indian culture and myth and things like that. I mean, that's specifically set during the period of the East India Company. So it's a historical story. And the history is woven into that in a very good way. So he's a good writer and really uses India as a great backdrop.
Yes, and having praised MFV, it is of course time to talk about Felipe Andrade's art, which is beautiful stuff here. It's very, I think, possibly helped by the colour palette. It's very sort of washed out and light, but it's very impactful. And there's a lot of very good compositions of, the characters being woven into this gorgeous background image. I think there's a lot of very impressive single images in this comic. Yeah, no,
it's absolutely beautiful. As I was reading it, I was, stunned by just how beautiful the art was, and really enjoyed taking time to appreciate it, especially on, some of the panels that don't have dialogue when it's all just told through the art. I liked how sort of abstract it was. It's quite impressionistic, I guess, almost in style, which it kind of, I haven't read a huge amount of comics, so it kind of reminded me a bit of Descender. I know Descender had a sort of watercolour approach, which was very good. But again, the sort of slightly impressionistic, almost a bit abstract style to the art really worked in both cases.
I guess it's sort of vaguely similar, sort of soft, painterly vibe going on between this and Descender. There's definitely a certain sort of beauty to it. And as you say, there's, between both the writing and the art, there's a real ability to use images other than just, here is the characters doing a thing. Here's the next thing they do, and the next thing. There's a real sort of attempt to tell the story by showing other parts of the environment or other things that are happening to, evoke mood. That's good writing, and indeed good art. It is beautifully executed, because Felipe Andrade can draw, as I say, a good landscape or a good mood-evoking space.
Yeah, and I really felt this comic had a strong sense of place.
Yeah.
Which I guess this kind of unites both of the points we were trying to make. It's definitely done through the art, because the details of like the place, like the background, the details of sort of Indian culture very much in the background, like the places the scenes take place, but also it relates to Ramvi and the way he draws on Indian culture and myth for his stories that he tells. But it did feel that it really had a sense of place. It was set in India, and they kind of conveyed things like how crowded it is and busy, and like how busy the traffic can be and things like that, and also how the sort of flora is very different in the design of the houses and things like that. But it really felt very much like it's one of those stories that is set in a specific place. It's not specific enough to be alienating. You don't need to have a deep understanding of the culture to appreciate the story, but it is definitely has a strong sense of place running through it.
Yeah, which is, I think I said something similar about Ms. Marvel a few weeks back. That sort of specificity is what makes it feel alive, and like, you're actually dealing with characters who live in this culture. They're just talking about things that are their lives without, explaining it to the reader.
Yeah, exactly. And you get a lot of sense of the interiority of the characters. You get, considering that's like not particularly long, you do get a lot of sense of who they are and things like that. You don't need lots of details, but you do get a strong sense of their personality, what motivates them, the sort of people they are, the changes they go through. Again, a lot of their big changes happen off page between two issues. Laila decides at one point that she's just going to enjoy mortal life and gets into drugs, sex, partying, food and drink. We don't see that. It all just happens between issues in the sort of the space between the moments of the story, because the story is about the times the characters meet, come together, and which dramatises the events. But everything else is sort of outside that, but it's still relevant.
Well, yeah, because you could probably have easily written, like, I don't know, a 12, 20 issue version of this where you, yeah, as you say, dramatise everything that happens to Laila Starr. But I think one of the things that gives it its sort of epic, mythic, really transcendent property is the way he just picks these moments and manages to convey all the things that happen to her between them just by the way she's changed.
Exactly, yeah. It's just the right amount of story. It's the opposite of what we were saying about Umbrella Academy. This just has exactly what it needs and no more. Like, yeah, 5 issues, a 6th issue would be too much.
Yes. It's probably the best comic I've read this year. It's honestly the best comic I've read in quite a while. Strong recommendation.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend this to anyone with any interest in comics or reading in general. Like, if you're it's got all the elements of a great novel. Yeah, a great novel. Work of modern sort of magical realism or literary fiction, that it weaves in big themes and myth and culture, but also tells a very beautiful story at the same time.
Yeah. If you like sort of Sandman-esque comics or sweeping magical realism literary novels, this is a good shout.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice so that others can find out about the show. If you want more from us, then you can visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces from Nick and myself.
And if you want still more emitted from our bodies, then you can go to social media and follow us on Twitter as @MFV Podcast or on Facebook as just Moderate Fantasy Violence. And if that's not enough, you can also follow me on social media, where I am @NickMB on Twitter and nickbryan.com on the broader internet.
You can find more from me on Twitter, where I'm @AlistairJRBall, or find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us for the next episode of the podcast, where we will be abducted by a UFO in Nope, and then facing the ultimate predator in Prey. Join us next time for all of that. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.
From our bodies.
Yep. It's sometimes just doing these bits of podcast text on the hoof just gets away from me.
Just reminded me of that one from the Sparrow Academy that spat venom. That was quite viscerally unpleasant.